Welcome to this panel about Taylor Swift's song history. It's so great to have you here. We're going to get real in depth.
If you didn't hear me before, I will repeat for the entire room. Taylor Swift writes music for 4-year-olds, and I'm not joking. You can come fight me after the panel.
This is the point we'll be debating today in this 6-hour panel. Thank you very much.
I know. You want to talk
The
about what
doors
kind of
have been
character Taylor
locked.
Swift is? We can do that.
We're doing this. We're going hardcore.
All right. So thank you all for showing up. This is a great turnout.
this is
We are
packed.
way impressed. I am Dr. Daniel Gronsky. I'm an associate professor of English and Media Studies. I am significantly less famous than this guy, who is...
Hello, my name's Davey Reedon. I am the writer/designer on the Stanley Parable and the Beginner's Guide.
I wasn't kidding, right? Look at this guy. What's he doing here with me?
And by the way, first off, can everyone hear? Is the mic getting all the way to the back? Yeah. Okay. Cool. So he's standing because has the ability to convey a more casual and connected relationship with his audience. I am so beat tired right now. I need to sit down. So I'm hoping that we appear like we're on a common ground speaking. But if we're not, then I'll just come down here and I'll.
We're easy going in here.
Yeah. Right. I figure we'll just play it as it comes. On all fronts.
All right, so this is a panel about character and what makes a good character. And, if you've been here the last couple of years, you've probably seen me around. I've done a couple of these things. Last year I did one on endings. The year before I did one on narrative and how narrative works in games and how that's different from movies or TV shows. I did one on agency a couple years ago that I was pretty proud of. I don't know if anybody here saw. Anybody in here see my other panels the last couple of years? You are objectively better than everyone in the room. You take that home with you. All right. This time around I'm focusing on character. I did talk a little bit about it when I talked about narrative, but I wanted to really focus in on it because it's a big, big part of how we connect to video games. There are actually been a couple of character-based panels here before. There's actually 2 here this year. There was one yesterday, I think, and there's one tonight, too. So, I hope I'm not retreading ground here, but I probably am. Here's the thing. The problem with the ones I've seen before, I didn't see the one yesterday, but the ones I've seen before, they always break down into people just kind of yelling out characters' names, like, Sephiroth, and then everyone goes, yeah, that guy's great, I love that guy. And it goes like that for an hour, and I hate that because it's not productive. What we're going to do instead is maybe knock over some water. But other than that, you saw the panel description, hopefully, or you just showed up to a room full of people. So I want to focus in on 3 things, basically. I want to talk about what makes a good character. What makes a character a good character? I want to talk about character portrayal, which basically comes down to acting. How is the character acted? How are they brought to life? And I want to talk about identification. Now, identification has 3 components. You could argue other stuff. I say it has 3 components, and I got the microphone, so there you go. Relatability, consistency, and representation. Now, I got to cop to something up here. I am a straight white male aged 18 to 49. Everyone listens to what I have to say, no matter how stupid it is. So I may be a little out of my wheelhouse on representational issues. If I misstep, if I say something dumb, cut me right the hell off, all right? Because I definitely want to hear from you guys. As we get going here, you see my notes in my hand here. I could just read these to you for an hour, but that sucks. We're not going to do that. Instead, if you guys want to chime in, if you got questions, throw your hands in the air when I get to a good stopping point, whatever it is I'm saying or whatever Davey's saying. We'll stop and we'll talk to you guys. We'll start taking hands from the crowd, and if we dovetail off onto some other stuff, that's all well and good too.
I think kind of the general tone that we discussed before coming to this was that Dan has an academic background and a critical background, and I have a development background. And I think that when you think about characters, and I mean really, you think about most aspects of crafting an experience, these are 2, like, we're looking at the same thing, but we're coming at it from 2 different angles, and I'm sort of interested to see how, I'm going to focus a little bit more on, like, what does it mean to try to create one of these things, and how do the same ideas reflect on coming at it from the ground up and actually building on those ideas to make a character that is interesting or compelling or whatever. Or why don't they end up compelling?
All right. So I'm going to start with some stuff I have covered here in the past. Some stuff about what makes a good character. So when you think about a lot of like iconic characters, important characters, they didn't necessarily have a great start. A lot of early games didn't tell you much about these guys. Who is Mario? If you're talking about the original Super Mario Brothers, who is Mario? Who is Luigi? Is Mario his first name or his last name? Because they're the Mario Brothers. These are real questions we had once upon a time, and we had no answers. Mario is, I guess, a plumber or possibly a carpenter. He jumps on turtles.
I think by canon, their last name is Mario.
He is Mario, and Luigi Mario. We know
right.
Now we have answers. We didn't then.
Yeah.
If you know, Mega Man, I actually looked up the original Mega Man instruction manual for the Mega Man 1. Mega Man, resisting reprogramming, Mega Man is chosen the defender of the universe and its inhabitants. That is literally all we know. The game itself tells you nothing. So a lot of these iconic characters might be iconic because we've projected a lot onto them. But in terms of development inside the game itself, very, very little, very, very loose. And it's funny because games are long-form media. You guys know the difference between long-form and short-form when I'm talking about media? Okay, I'm seeing some people shaking their heads, so I'll explain. A short-form media is something like a TV show or a movie. It's an hour, it's 2 hours, it is complete. Everything is right there. You start talking about long-form is sequential storytelling, things that take multiple hours. So things like comic books, which just spin out infinitely until they get canceled. Long-running TV shows with a spread-out plot. Or video games, which, especially if you're talking about like a major RPG, you're talking about 100 hours of gameplay. It's a lot of time to work with. Games just in general are long-form media.
And one of the things that I have had, I mean, we talked a little bit about this, and I have so much to say about pacing. Because I think that the failure of the vast majority, like even games that are like really, really focusing on like story and just character development. I think part of the background that we come from is one where the character description is Mega Man is here to save the universe. So anything more detailed than that feels revelatory. But in the context of any other medium, that is not revelatory, right? I mean, you take like say a 10-hour game, you know, where we have the one that I've been thinking about lately is Life is Strange, because Life is Strange did a lot of great things, right? And it's wonderful that that game exists and has been made. I think that the character development is very poorly paced in that game. And I think that part of why we're happy to see Life is Strange is because there are so few efforts at doing what they did. But then if you step back and you look at any other medium that takes 15 hours of just character development, like the characters, like we know so much less about the characters in Life is Strange than we would in any other medium of 15 hours. And any other like well done. I have a that Star Wars video that that clip that I guess we're not plugged into.
We didn't actually set up any tech, so
I don't know. I'm skipping ahead a little bit here. But
that's fine.
Okay, so there's a great. Has anyone ever watched that like hour and a half long review of the Phantom Menace? Yeah. Okay. So it's a great review. It's really very interesting. There's one section of that review that is fascinating to me. And I think about it. I mean, how long? I don't know. That thing came out like a decade ago or something now. But it's literally stuck with me the whole time, which is where the author of the review goes around to goes and interviews people and says, "Okay, here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna name some Star Wars characters, and without telling me what they look like, what their job is, or what their role in the film is, describe this character as best you can, as though I've never seen them before, as though I've never heard of them before, right?" And of course, the point that he's making is that like, what is Han Solo like? What is C-3PO like? And people are like, blah 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 blah. And then what is Queen Amidala like?
Let's go with stoic.
Yeah, right. And so that was the point that he was making is like when we take away all this other stuff, who is this person? Like, what do they care about? What do they think about? What do they want? What makes them angry? And so right off the bat, I just think that to pace our games well means that like if you have an hour to talk to convey to us something about who this character is, how much do I come away from actually knowing about that character at the end of an hour?
Yeah, and that's great. I mean, because like I was saying, it's a long form media. You have a lot of time to explore these guys. You don't have to tell me everything in the first 15 minutes, and you shouldn't wait until the last 15 minutes.
I mean, the last 15 minutes, let alone the last 15 hours, right? Because we have the ability to go for 100 hours, like you said. So I feel like that gives a lot of developers a license to be like, well, we have so much time, right? Like,
but if you think about the pacing in a movie, by the end of the first 30 minutes of a movie, you know who everyone is, you know their motivations, you know what they want, you know where they're going, you know what they're trying to do.
You have to. You literally have no other
That's
choice.
a quarter of the movie. When you think about a quarter of a 100-hour game, that's 25 hours. That's so much time that you don't want to do it in the first 30, but you don't want to do it, 25 hours in. If I've got to wait 25 hours in, why do I care?
But it begs the question, why does it need to take 25 hours, right?
And that's a great question,
which
too,
for
but
me
that's
is just
it's another question.
That's just part of my own personal crusade for shorter games. But
all right.
I think that the shorter that the less space that you have to work in, the more economical you have to get. Like, you literally can't waste any time, because people are just gonna, I don't know. I think all games should be shorter. But
Fair point, but I think maybe a different panel.
I know. That's
No. All right, so I actually want to do something for a second here. You remember about 10 minutes ago I said I don't want this to devolve into us just shouting out character names? Shout out some character names. Okay. Okay, that actually didn't go quite as I expected, believe it or not. But the point of that exercise I was trying to make is those guys were not necessarily good characters. Some of them were good characters. What they were characters that you liked or characters that you remembered, or in a couple of notable cases, they're extremely bad characters because you were trying to have some fun at my expense, and you did. The point is likability doesn't make a character good. Not always. It can be part of what makes a character good, but it isn't the thing that makes a character good. And there's a lot of reasons to like a character. There's a lot of different reasons. We'll talk about that in a little while. Because let me talk about two of my all-time favorite characters. One of them is pretty recent, actually. Did anybody in here play Tales of Zestiria? Less of you than should have. It's the latest in the Tales series that's come to America. The main character, Saray, I love Saray because Saray is an adventurer and an academic and a scholar, so that might hit a little close to home, and that's something else to talk about later. But he's got a great just personality. He's likable, he's enthusiastic, he's considerate, and these are all hooks for me, likability hooks for me. But another all-time heavy air quotes favorite character. Did anybody in here ever play Lunar, Silver Star Story? Going old school on this one. The villain, Galleon. I've said this before. I've never hated a character as much as I hate Galleon. There is no living human being that I hate as much as fictional character Galleon from Lunar. Because Galleon just absolutely never gives you an inch. He never respects your abilities. He is the consummate villain.
I hear people say that about Kefka a lot, too.
Kefka's great, but Kefka is, let's be honest, he's a Joker ripoff.
He is.
I love him. I love the game. It's my favorite game, but he's a ripoff. Sorry about that. All right. But so likability doesn't necessarily make a character good. Doesn't necessarily make a character bad either, but it's a separate issue.
So there's something that I was thinking about in terms of design, which is that, like, think about game mechanics. Lately especially, we've seen this resurgence of brutally difficult game design that people get really, really deep into, right?
Somehow deep in our bones, I think we all think games should be hard. We don't always enjoy that, but we think they should be hard.
And lately, there's been like an actual the market has risen to meet that demand in a very serious way via roguelikes and Dark Souls likes and whatever. So I think this is really interesting because or XCOM, for example, right? Like, what do people talk about when they talk about XCOM?
When their guys die.
They talk about when you named everyone after all your friends and then they all got brutally slaughtered, right?
I had an alien come through a shop window and tear a guy into 2 pieces.
So I think that what that says is that we don't dislike when bad things happen to us. We dislike when boring things happen to us, right?
That is such an awesome point.
And the same exact thing I think is true of characters, but I think so many of the characters we design that developers design are designed around being likable, right, as opposed to being interesting. And in the same way that a brutally difficult game can still be fascinating, a very unlikable character, like, okay, if you say there's a design that you put in your game, right, like it's going to be really, really hard for players to deal with this thing, but did it make their experience more interesting? Like, does the interaction with that thing cause them to care about their play, get more invested? And then ask that of your character, right? Like, does interacting with this character make my play experience more interesting? Does their role in this story cause me to be more invested? Doesn't matter whether or not I like them, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like they might be awful. They might make your experience significantly more difficult to get through. But that doesn't mean that you're not actually increasing your player's investment in the story.
I think a lot of times we think what we're looking for in a character is likability, and that's one of my big problems with Sephiroth is he's the villain, but he's very likable, and I don't like that. Your villain shouldn't be likable. We think we're looking for likability, but what we're really looking for is somebody who reacts to the narrative in an interesting way, who moves the story forward so that interesting things are happening to all of the characters.
Here's something that I like to think about. So, like, take a character, any character, like, I don't know, one of your party members in your game, someone who's supposed to be like a jolly kind of like, yeah, we're doing this thing, right? Could that character have a negative impact on the story, and would the character still hold up? Because if they don't, I think they're just a total straw person with who is not fleshed out enough to be able who doesn't have anything going for them other than the fact that they're dangling this likability, sugar string in front of you to keep you. Because if they could have a negative impact, then they're probably interesting enough that they deserve to be there.
Question. I hate that guy, but also he's a bad character because he reacts statically to every situation. He learns nothing over the course of 85 hours. All of the characters in that game actually are pretty bad. It's one of the biggest problems with that game.
So Squall is really...
I could do a whole thing on Final Fantasy
Squall
VIII.
is interesting because he's surrounded by people who are his polar opposite, right? And I think that's what makes him stand out. Like, I kind of identified with him at times where he would go like, where everyone would be like, Squall, we want you to be the hero. And he'd be like, okay, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
like, that's how
I get it.
If
like
everyone around me was nothing but like constant sugar happiness all the time, I'd probably also start to disconnect.
And I believe that what they were actually shooting for there was the idea of this guy who's very closed off, who's very cold and distant, and possibly actually depressed, like clinically depressed. And he's got all these people around him who want to be his friends, who want to pull him out of this, who want to get him involved in the world. And he's fighting and resisting, and eventually, the problem is, eventually nothing really happens. Eventually, things kind of happen independently of him, and it doesn't go anywhere. And I think that's one of the big failings of the game.
I saw a hand back here first, yeah.
Okay. That's a hard question. It's a good question, but it's a hard question. I would say, in that sense, well, like I said, we think we're looking for likability, and sometimes the people who are making these things think we're looking for likability, but we're looking for something interesting. Scrappy is a problem not merely because he's not actually likable, but because he doesn't move the story forward in a way that makes sense. If you talk about classic Scooby-Doo, Scooby-Doo wants to run away and Scrappy wants to fight. And the problem is, like, there's a potential for an interesting conflict there, but they always just run away anyways. You had your hand up? I think this is a Davey question.
I mean, I think it has more to do with consistency. There's no one answer to that question. The answer stems from the emotional cadence that you're trying to create. I think there are some excellent video games that have deliberately used that dissonance against you, right? I mean, like, I hated The Last of Us up until the very last, like, 5 minutes of the game.
I love The Last of Us up until the last 5 minutes
really?
of the
Okay,
game.
we have a totally different. But I also just like
Which is something we'll want to talk about.
I have a whole thing about length of games, but that's.
I actually wanted to talk maybe a little bit about Last of Us in a little bit here.
Well, so anyway, my reaction was exactly what you're talking about, where I had felt like I was a psychopath the entire game, but the game was trying to convince me that I was being good through, like, offering me little choices, and then at the end I was like, oh no, I was a psychopath.
My problem is you're not a believable psychopath because he should have been shot dead about 15 times there. No joke. The first time I played the end of that game, I walked straight into the search party while you're carrying the girl. I walked straight into them because I thought that was the ending that I was supposed to do. I'm like, there's no way I can avoid all of these guys with guns. But no, you can just walk past them.
Anyway, so to answer your question, I think that is something that stems. So I think that as a designer, you want to understand the limits of the system you're creating and to create something compelling within that system, and that has everything to do with what type of game you're creating. And hopefully, if you're doing a good job, erase that. Never mind. Hopefully, you are creating systems that are personal enough to you, right? That the way that you push the characters forward becomes about your personality in some way. That's what I like. So, for example, if it feels important to you to create dissonance between what the player is doing and what the character is doing, if that's like a form of expression for you, I think that should be used, and I think that should be part of your game in a way that it wouldn't have worked in any other game. And I realize that's a very vague answer, but that's because that's like a whole giant thing. And usually when I get to these big, like, what do the systems, mean? Like, if we're just doing like a 30-second kind of soundbite here, like, what I'll say is, you got to invent it because it'll only work for what you're trying to do if you invent it in a way that it hasn't quite been done before.
All right, I think we need to move on.
Yeah, let's move on.
So I wanted to talk now about acting. I want to talk about the presentation of the characters, the performance. And I have to tell you guys something, and I suspect a lot of you guys are not going to like hearing this, because I've talked to a lot of people, smart people, educated people, people who actually work in media, people who are savvy media consumers, and the one thing they all have in common is something they have in common with probably most of you guys. You can't tell the difference between good acting and bad acting. Now, I'm sorry to tell you this. Now, obviously, you can tell the difference between acting and really bad acting. But the thing about acting is this. All right, so let's start with willing suspension of disbelief. You guys know willing suspension of disbelief? All right, so here's the basic truth. You want to believe what's happening in a game. Actors are liars. They're professional liars. This is their job to lie to you. And they're in a context where you want to believe them. So you do. Even if they're not doing a good job, if they're not being convincing liars, you're like, I want to go along with this. I want to get on this ride, and I want to get where it's going. So I believe you, even if they're only doing the most passably decent job of conveying that to you. You want to roll along with it. Now, I can talk to you guys about all kinds of film school stuff. I can talk to you about subconscious projection, cool shot effects, styles of acting, how they're accomplished, what they're supposed to do. That's not the important thing. The important thing is you want it to be true, so you accept that it's true. Um, and a lot of times, like really top tier acting, and again, I'm making a generalization here. I'm sure some of you guys definitely know your acting. Anybody who's taken an acting class definitely knows the difference. But there's a lot of top tier acting that is mostly wasted on people. And I don't say that to be insulting to you guys. I don't mean to be insulting to you guys because you're all smart guys, you're all great guys. But it's something I really need to put out there. Shuttle say, subtle shades and nuances a lot of times go to waste. Now, acting can be really bad, though. It can be so bad that it breaks your suspension of disbelief. You're like, what the hell was that? It's not as bad as it used to be. Any of you guys who played older games, especially anything that got localized, anything Japanese that came over here. The last panel here was Persona. Some of the very early Persona stuff was really bad in terms of localization. But anymore, just about everybody's running a pretty good staff for this. The two most recent examples I can really think of for bad acting in a game are, what do I write down here? 2003 and 2009. Batten Kaitos, if anybody played that, had atrocious acting. And one of the best narrative hooks I've ever seen in a game, and terrible acting to get it across. And from 2009, Arcry's Fantasia. Now, I bet a lot of people did not play that one. You should, because it has one of the best battle systems I've ever encountered in an RPG. The acting was done phonetically by a French-Canadian localization team into English. It's actually so bad, it comes back around again. It is hilarious. The one of the girls is like clearly has no idea what she's saying. Not a clue. So really bad acting can take you out of stuff. I never played Other M. I know that got a lot of bad reviews for the acting in it, among other things in it. But the point I'm actually trying to make here is that acting isn't as vital as a lot of people think. This comes up a lot even if I take a step away from video games for a second. Think about any time they're casting a movie, like a big franchise, anytime they adapt a comic book into a movie or something like that. And people always like, ooh, casting choices. And they never think about how good the actor is. They think about what they look like. Like, do they look like the character? Can they act? Who gives a shit? This is a model. This is a guy from TV. They should be in this big budget movie. People don't make the distinction. That's what I'm saying. So it isn't as vital as we think it is, but there are some good examples of real good acting. And one of those I want to talk about was Last of Us. Because Last of Us, I had some real problems with that game. In a lot of places I had problems. I had a problem with the fact that it's one hallway all the way through. You just walk in a straight line and murder things as you see them. I had a problem with the ending, which I just talked about a minute ago. I feel like if that's the ending they wanted to go for, you should have died at the end of that game. But you know what I didn't have an acting problem with? Yeah, I gave it away. It's the acting. The acting in that game is great. There is a sequence where Joel and Ellie are in the bedroom, and he's finally now talking about his daughter that he lost, and what is their relationship to each other. And it's one of the best things. Forget games. It's one of the best pieces of acting, period, I've ever seen. It's super emotional. If you didn't tear up a little bit, you're a cyborg. Check under your skin. You're actually a cyborg. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you that.
So when we were kind of like kicking around some ideas before this panel, and I started thinking about so what is the role of voice acting? Like, what does, especially thinking about it as a developer, why? Because I have my work has very substantially used voice acting, and I've kind of tried to figure out why that is, and I think that the way that voice acting occurs to me is a kind of glue. Like, I don't actually think that voice acting can carry an experience, because like you said, Last of Us, amazing voice acting, and then overall you can look at that game and maybe it holds up for you, maybe it doesn't, but the voice acting can be great, and you can still be like, overall though, I felt like this totally fell apart. And so I've been thinking about like where does the voice acting actually serve as a good scaffolding, right? Where does it actually prop something up and make it better than it would have been otherwise? And I realize that there's actually a very serious or there's a very real technological element to this for a number of reasons. Because we unless you get to a really high budget production, and even then, you're very unlikely to convincingly use voice like because the voice will sound exactly the way it sounds in real life, but the face and the gestures and everything else, you're gonna know that there's something wrong, and so there's this weird
You hit an
dissonance.
uncanny valley situation.
And we get high enough. I actually, we get high and we do well enough that at least we're willing to be like I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure that's Joel and Ellie, and we do make that, and we drop that, we're willing to suspend the disbelief. But like that's only when when you're working at that high of a level, right? Like
I mean, AAA guys, they all have great talent. They have, like, some of them spring for real movie stars to do this stuff.
and they have the budget to back that up. So what do you do if you don't have that budget, right? Like as soon as you drop, it's like as soon as you go below this level of quality, if you get down to here, then it's just like it falls apart radically, because immediately we're like, none of this holds up for me anymore. And so I've been really curious to know, like, well, how do you use voice acting if this is the bar that we're talking about, that it has to be literally up here? And so one of the things that we're definitely going to talk about is her story.
Yes, absolutely.
Because her story figured out a solution to that problem. And hopefully people continue to
How many
investigate.
people in here have played Her Story?
Oh,
Oh,
goodness. Oh, my-
Heartbreaker.
Oh,
Three
dear.
of you.
Okay,
Um,
it's seriously, it is tremendous.
$5?
It's $7.
$7.
It's tremendous. You really should. If you're here at a panel about characters in video games, so I assume this is of interest to you. Go play Her Story.
I don't have enough good things to say about Her Story, and just to give the rest of you guys the gist of it. Basically, it is a game. The game part is a little loose, but still very engaging. You're reviewing old police interrogation tapes of this lady, and you search. Basically, you Google search for various keywords to turn up more videos.
It has there's the transcript of everything that she has said. It's all broken up into tiny clips, and you search by words in her.
Maybe 2 minutes, maybe 30 seconds, maybe 10 seconds. Maybe it's just one word.
And so it is literally it's probably the most investigative gameplay I've ever done in a game.
And trying to get 100% complete on it is actually really engaging.
Like trying to piece together, because you're just basically given this pile and said, figure out what's going on. And so you take when she says something, you'd be like, wait, she mentioned that thing. I wonder if there's anything else like that. And you search that thing, and that leads down, and it gets to this place where you have like notepads of like all this stuff that you've written down. Be like, well, I got to remember to check about the wife, because there's something about a mushroom and a baby, and then it's like
She mentioned Bill. Is Bill important? Bill's not important.
Bill's not
Okay, what
important.
else?
Bill has nothing to do with the story, but you've got like Bill might be the key to unlocking it all, and it's insane.
And it's fantastic.
And it's all of it is one woman
One
sitting
lady.
in front of a camera. That's it.
Just acting, just
Yeah.
killing it.
Yeah.
And a variety of sort of different whatever part of the story she's talking about, giving you just the complete range of human emotion.
Yep.
Oh,
The robot woman. Yeah. Yeah. We shouldn't get me started on David Cage.
yeah. So Quantic Dream is actually terrible, right? They're really bad storytellers.
I think they're really bad storytellers, yeah. But again, there's like the situation where it's like, cool, I'm glad that someone is trying. I'm so glad
It's
someone
something
is
new, yeah.
trying and doing that. But as soon as you get over this is interesting relative to what's already out there, if you just actually look at it, I think it.
From a technical standpoint,
yeah, I mean that. So that video, I have a lot of problems with, mostly because mostly because of the woman's role in it and the kind of portrayal of gender roles in that particular one, which I think Quantic Dream has done a poor job, at least in Heavy Rain.
I hated Heavy Rain.
Which
That's another one we could kill an hour on, by the way.
I don't. Like you said, you yourself said it's uninteresting to just call stuff out and be like, "That's great, that sucks." So let's not go down a rabbit hole.
Good call.
Let's actually have a conversation about this stuff.
All right.
But Heavy Rain was one case where like the technology at least got close enough to the technology was good enough that you could have leveraged that into a compelling story with compelling characters backed up by strong voice actors.
And it
right?
actually illustrates the thing you were saying before too, because there's it's the sex scene actually, where your arms and legs aren't moving right, and you're like, whoa, this got body horror real quick on me here.
Right. And so, but it begs this question, right? If it takes that much work to just get it up to that level, and you're still gonna fail, what is that other missing thing? And should we be focusing on the missing thing first and build the technology around it? Which is why something like Her Story works, because they start with they start with
a 100-year-old technology that we've already almost perfected.
Right. And they say, okay, I know that this experience is compelling. Let me build around that. Right? And this is just the thing that we so often fail to do, is to say, what is the experience? What is the what is the reason I care about this character or why am I going to want to do this? And then we start crafting the technological element that's going to make sense and that you have resources to. A lot of indie developers literally don't have the ability to do something like what Quantic Dream is doing, and so you say, okay, well, what can I do? I mean, this is just as a personal anecdote. The way that Stanley Parable started was that I had opened up Source engine, right? And Source is a archaic engine, but it was like one of the only things at the time that I knew that I could just download for free. So Source does two things very well. Source makes boxy like hallways, and it does guns. And those are it's great for both of those things, right? Well, I didn't want to do guns, so all I had is just like empty hallways, right? So I said, okay, so I have an empty hallway, and I can stream audio in. What can I do with that? And as soon as I realized that once I got a good voice actor, I could completely bypass the entire technological issue, as long as I was smart enough about the design that it made sense that you can't see this person.
Right. And I think that's what we're looking for in terms of performance. We're looking for something that not only doesn't break your suspension of disbelief, but it's going to enhance. It's going to make it easier to get into what you're doing.
But it works because I'm not trying to, in Stanley Parable's case, it's not trying to convince you that it's something other than what it is.
Exactly.
Her Story is not trying to convince you that it's something other than what it is. And as soon as you've like, as a developer, if you've sat me down, especially if you're, from a technological standpoint, if you're going like, look, it's this, I promise, if you're having to like pitch me on it, you've kind of already lost me, right? Like I shouldn't be pitched to. It should be intrinsically evident in the thing that's been created that it fits.
Immersion. And I think that actually moves us up to identification, yeah?
Sure.
All right, good segue. Identification. So before I really get into what identification is, what it entails, what it's all about, I think I need to mention why it's important. It's a big deal in any narrative medium, right? But in video games, you actually become that person. That's you. That is you for the duration of the game. So you might be able to watch, let's say Jessica Jones, which is 13 episodes, 13 hours, but it's an hour at a time. You might not necessarily have a personal connection to the character of Jessica Jones. I didn't. But I liked the show. I enjoyed it. I got where she was coming from. That all made sense. 15 hours of The Last of Us, to pick on that game again, gets a lot harder if you're not into Joel. If you think he's a sociopath, and he is, and you're like, I don't want to be a sociopath, well, tough shit. You're a sociopath for the next 15 hours. And that gets a little rough. And some of the other stuff that we're going to talk about really feeds into this.
Well, this is why, character drama, especially in TV shows, is so effective because basically what writers are doing is building this buffer in to their stories, right? They're saying we don't like if you have an ensemble cast, you don't need everything doesn't need to ride on this one character because we always have all of these other characters and hopefully they're compelling enough that we can bounce around and shift. And there are games that have definitely tried to do this to varying degrees, but for the most part, we tend to have game stories where we because we're meant to play as this one character, right? And we're meant to follow this one character. And so that becomes a design constraint where it's like if that one character doesn't carry me through this entire experience, then and I think this is probably why TV shows tend toward ensemble casts
One of the reasons.
because of the length, right? Like in a film, you've got 2 hours, you can really drill in on this one character and make sure you really like them. But with a TV show, we don't know 2 seasons from now whether or not people are going to like this character.
The Fonz.
Sure, yeah.
The Fonz was not the main character of Happy Days. Then he was.
Yeah, yeah. But that's the kind of buffer that you build in when you're giving yourself options, which we often don't have.
Which is why identification really starts with relatability. So before when I said a likable character isn't necessarily a good character, well, a likable character is a relatable character. How much do you like this person? How much do you want to be like this person? How much of yourself do you see in them? How much aspirational quality do they have? So let's take a moment to take a look at how I'm dressed. I just blinded myself. That was dumb. Let's take a look at how I'm dressed. I used to, when I was a much younger man, I used to dress all in Kung Fu guys, Street Fighters and Fist of North Star and all that stuff. And there was, a couple of years ago, there was a girl here who talked about doing a panel on the sociology of cosplay. Breaks my heart that she never did it. It's such an interesting idea to me. How do we present ourselves when we're in a costume? Because as I grew older and realized that physical strength was not actually my strength, I started to be more and more smart guys. I see myself in the smart guys like Professor Layton. I have a Riddler costume that I've worn here in the past. And now anytime, if I'm doing a costume, I'm like, who's a smart guy? What smart guy do I want to be like? I really thought about doing Saray from Tales of Zestiria, but it's a complicated costume. There was somebody here yesterday in it, and it blew my mind that somebody put that kind of work into it. Serious cosplayers are whew. So I'm looking for somebody who's like me, who embodies the characteristics that I see in myself. And that's where likability comes into play. And again, that's one of my big problems with Sephiroth, is there's a lot of that alienation, that a lot of that I have been wronged and I must revenge. That's very easy for any person to see in themselves and be like, but he's the villain. You're not supposed to see yourself in the villain unless you're trying to do something clever, and they weren't.
And there is a kind of, because we were talking before about likability and relatability, and there is this weird thing that happens in games where this sort of changes based on whether or not you're controlling the character, right? Like you get a lot more leeway for the characters to just do wacky, crazy things that you would never relate to if you're not playing as them and if you're not expected to be like sticking with this person. And so when we're talking about these things, it's probably good to say like, okay, none of these are like hard and fast, these are what characters should be like, but these are ways to think about the roles that different characters have, and based on the story you're trying to create, what roles do each of those characters need to maintain? I see a hand? Yeah, this is such a big thing that we can, we
And
can.
I think one of the big things there, and this is another panel too, where it's like, okay, well, it's player choice, but it's what's the joke? Kill the kitten or send it to college. It's like you have two really obvious choices, and one's good and one's bad, and that's not exactly player choice, but how do you represent the entirety of the human experience in the confines of a video game? Which then are you doing what you're supposed to? And it becomes all narratively very complicated thing to accomplish.
There's, I think, one thing. Oh gosh, there's no way I can do this because it's a total spoiler. But we could easily look at, I think, the very last choice in Life is Strange and break down what is going on there on a design level and how that choice relates to the character. Because and I won't spoil it, but the very last thing that you do in Life is Strange is is a choice that you make, which either essentially supports the narrative arc that's been alluded to and builded to this entire time, or essentially rejects it. And so it's like this really fascinating question, like why, like how is it that my character is able to abandon the narrative arc that's been built. There's one other interesting example of this in film that I really like. I don't know if anyone has seen Young Adult.
Yes.
So Young Adult, and I guess I'm slightly spoiler territory here, but Young
Not
Adult.
really.
Young Adult is an example of a film where the character has been learning and growing and building and changing, and then right at the last minute, she abandons it all.
Just rejects it.
She
Does
rejects
not like what she
everything,
learns.
and she goes back exactly to the way that she was. And I think there's something very human and very real about that. But when we surrender that to a player, to whether or not our player, I think when we give up the power of the character to make that choice to whether or not the player thinks it will be more or less interesting, I think the character suffers. I think that that person's character arc needed in Young Adult, her character arc needed to go that way because that's who she is, right?
Actually, I think this segues pretty nice into the next thing I want to talk about, which is consistency, because characters don't always act consistently, but you want their actions to make some kind of sense. And the focal character I had for this is I want to talk about Kanji Tatsumi from Persona 4, because he's the greatest character in all of video games. I will fist fight anyone who disagrees. Kanji is great because if you didn't play the game, Kanji is this young man. He's in high school. He is trying to. He's afraid he's gay. Is basically his story arc in the game. He's afraid he's gay, and he doesn't know what that means, and he doesn't know what kind of person that makes him. And because he's uncertain about that, he makes a lot of choices, and he kind of goes back and forth. And the thing is, at the end of the game, he doesn't really say, yes, I am gay, I am out of the closet, I have embraced my sexuality. But Kanji is 15. Kanji doesn't know what he is in any sense. He's this big, tough guy who's afraid he might be gay. Maybe he is gay, maybe he isn't gay. Excuse me. But he's trying to figure it out. And because he's trying to figure it out, when he does things that don't necessarily line up, it makes sense. In Young Adult, when she makes a deliberate choice at the end not to change, it makes sense because it makes narrative sense for who the character is and what they've defined themselves as.
So to piggyback off of this, I think that a lot of times there's a tendency for designers to say, okay, we want this character to be a blank slate, right? We want you to be able to come in and to project whatever it is that however you feel about that character. And I actually think that you lose a lot. Well, you don't necessarily lose a lot. You just transfer power from one place to another. But the place you're transferring it away from is the power of the character to sustain their own narrative arc and to learn their own lessons, and which is the reason that we consume media, is to see our choices. Yeah. So the question was whether or not predefining the character encourages linearity. As an answer to that question, I would encourage you to play Firewatch if you haven't already. Okay, great. So I think Firewatch specifically addresses a lot of these questions. And I was watching an interview with the developers. When you start Firewatch, they tell you, like, it's text. And this is fascinating. It is a twine, the start of Firewatch. They tell you exactly who this character is. And you get to make little choices about things. But they're not changing who the character is. They're changing kind of what were some of the decisions that character made along his life. So by the time you actually start playing the game, the character is done. He's a person, right? He's set. But that game has so much choice in terms of how the characterization unfolds,
And
right?
I think that's a fair thing too, because all of us, as we go through life, we change who we are as individuals. But nobody is going to leave this room and spontaneously do random shit and be a different person entirely. You're going to do things that are informed by who you are and the experience you've had in life up to this point.
We'll get your question. I had this gave me a thought, which is something I think about all the time in dialogue, like multiple choice dialogue systems, which is I personally like to imagine that all of the choices that you're being presented with are all choices that the character at that moment is wrestling with saying or thinking, and you're just choosing which one happens to come out. And I personally, I haven't done, I haven't designed like a dialogue system or anything, but actually, Kentucky Route Zero is one of my favorite examples of that because when I play Kentucky Route Zero, I'm constantly thinking that every option I'm being presented actually is a thing that that character is saying, just maybe not in this particular expression of that character. So that's a way that, to me, dialogue systems make more sense. Not to say these are a totally different character that you're designing, but you're just choosing what in the kerfuffle of human thought that, creates chaotic, brain, bizarreness that we can't even imagine. One thing happens to come out, and it was that.
All right, your question? The boundaries.
Henry. But those are both Henry, right? And that's the important thing, right? Is that either way you look at that, you can say like, oh yeah, no, I can see how that choice, how that set of dialogue came from the person, from the character who I was handed at the start of this game.
And when those actions aren't consistent, then you're like, who is this character? Is he a character? Is he a blank slate?
Which actually, I mean, interesting things can be done with that, right?
Yeah, but I'm not sure I would call it a
They very rarely
character.
are on a competent level. Yeah.
All right, so we are running out of time rapidly here, and I still haven't talked at all about representation, which is like an entire panel. So you know what? Screw it. Free for all. I told you guys I won the representation lottery. I have my pick of guys when I play a game, and I get to be like, oh, I don't like that white guy. That white guy sucks. I want a different white guy. And I can have him, which is not true for everyone. So what are you guys interested in talking about in terms of representation? Well, I mean, I should hope so. Their cultures are vastly different, so that's going to make a lot of sense. And the sort of characters that Russia would produce would be very different, and the sort of characters that Brazil would produce would be very different. So
There's a whole panel here on quiet from Metal Gear Solid. Sorry, I'm seeing other hands. I didn't know. If we were gonna-
No, let's go to the next hand.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's actually sort of an interesting thing that I didn't even have in my cards here. It's the idea that if you are, there's at least half this room right now. I think that if they're playing a game, they're stuck playing it from a perspective that is not the one that they're used to having throughout the course of their day. When the rest of us are forced into something like that, it is sometimes, I mean, I'm really going to lean on that word sometimes, very enlightening for us, even within the confines of this fictional structured narrative.
Yes. Can you? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Fluidity Fluidity's pretty cool. And most games don't have that, especially ones with strict narrative structure too, because that's gonna really play havoc with a lot of the other things that you're trying to. You tell me if I'm off base here, but play havoc with the other things you're trying to set up down the line.
Well, if I mean, if it's Splatoon, you're not worried about that,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And that's why it's like, well, we've got this thing where it doesn't matter. Why not do that? And I think as a result of that, I mean, Splatoon has been huge, right? And I think there are many people who have not just who don't just play the game, but are like culturally invested in the game specifically because of those that kind of fluidity, which is fluidity is a funny way to talk about Splatoon, but
Fair enough.
Um, but I don't think it's a coincidence that many people have latched onto it for exactly that reason.
Right there in the middle. It's sort of, yeah, it's, I mean, there is a social function to stereotyping, that with a very broad brush you can paint something and we all have an idea, usually an incorrect one, of what that represents, which is great in a fast medium, especially like a fighting game where it's not super narrative as a gameplay structure. And I'm like, okay, from Japan, is sumo wrestler, got it.
And I think that actually is why it's so easy, from a development standpoint. That's why it's easy to use like other races and depictions of people, is because it's not all writing on that person, right? If it were like that was the star of your big budget thing, well, it's like, well, suddenly it becomes much riskier. But in this case, it is to a publisher might consider that like, oh, that's say a publisher who is like concerned about like is this gonna off-putting because it's not all white guys, right?
Yeah, well,
you can be like, oh no, it's because it's just one of our characters, and then but then it's almost like a Trojan horse, right, where you can get things in this way that you wouldn't have otherwise, because just and this is just, it comes down to development and logistics, right? And logistically that's easier to do.
And where that's problematic is because if I think about all my favorite characters, and I've mentioned a lot of them to you over the course of the last hour here, they are all white guys. Guys like me. And the fact that there are people here in this room right now who love games, who are so enthusiastic about games, they've shelled out, I don't even want to think about how much money, over the course of this weekend to sit around and talk about games and listen to us talk about games and then go play some games. And there's not guys like you in those games. There's not somebody for you to connect to and say, this is a guy like me, and I love him because he's like me, and I see myself in this situation. He reacts like I would react in this situation. That's not cool, man.
It's good. Hey, hand.
Well, it doesn't make them likable necessarily, but
I'd
there we go.
I don't think that a character flaw is a thing that emerges at one point or another. I think that if your character isn't flawed from the beginning all the way through, then they're not interesting.
They need to have something that they're reacting to, that they're attempting to overcome or move past, something that is going to they have positive attributes that affect their actions in the positive, negative attributes that will affect their actions in the negative, and again, move that narrative along in an interesting way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that like even a flaw that emerges like late in the experience, that should be something that you can look back at and go like, Oh, now looking back at that, now that makes sense to
It's
me, and
a
I
lot
can
of things
see
are
it going
lining up
all the way
now.
back, right? Because that means that your character is consistent and actually feels human.
All right, we are basically out of time. I see three hands in the air, so I'm going to start from the back of the room, come up
Lightning
to the
round.
front, and let's just do this all the way in the back. I'm sorry, can you just speak a little louder? You were way back there. So, so I'll let him talk about the business end in just a second, but it definitely affects what you see. The fact is, again, in case you missed it, I am a straight white guy and who is middle something, um, and there is a lot of shit that just doesn't occur to me because it's not part of my life experience. And it doesn't mean that it's not valid. It just means I don't think about it because it doesn't occur to me. It's not that I'm doing it out of malice, I'm doing it out of ignorance. So the fact that you don't have those people on staff to raise these issues absolutely is going to affect what you see in the output.
From a development standpoint, I think it has everything to do with both time and education. I think that we certainly there has been more, and I mean, I think everyone who's been paying attention has seen a tremendous amount more conversation about it in the last 5, 10 years. Really, the last like 5 years than there, ever was at any point before that. I don't think we're going to see the effects of that until several generations, right? I think that the people playing games right now
Minimum 7 years, I'm
are
going to say.
who are raising their kids, those kids are going to grow up thinking like it's just going to be like these are the issues that are a part that are that are important for me to think about. And I do think, but we uh, to educate people and through all, so like this is something that I think there when we come here to MAGFest, there are many people talking about this and many of these panels, and the more of these that we do and the more time that we take and the more, say, indie developers who can afford who can afford to take those risks, or who it makes more sense logistically in their development. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't make sense for big developers. I'm saying that, that
Financial sense, they're
a lot of
constrained in
money
a
is
lot
on
of
the
ways.
line for them, right? And the more that indie developers grow from the ground up, and that is going to take time, right? But I do think that in several generations we're going to see the effect of that. That I can't say what that is today, but I think if it continues the way that it's been going, I think it's only going to spread, and the demand for the diversity that you're talking about is going to increase.
Okay, Persona jacket. Full customizable creation. Got it. What was the game where you could be an ogre but not a black guy? You guys know what I'm talking about, right? So I think the more options that the player has in those kinds of games, better. Give them every option. You want to be blue, you can be blue. Go for it. I think that's great as long as again the production has the resources to implement that.
Well, and the question is for a product for a so like those very elaborate character creation systems, those aren't cheap to make, right? So what is it that incentivizes a big company to put a lot of time and energy into making those things? It's what is our return. And today, what the return is people going and posting all of their goofy Fallout 4 characters on Tumblr and Kotaku posts and everything, and that's marketing for Bethesda, right? And it's kind of, and this is one of these realities, right? Is that money is always going to be a factor there. Like if I think that that kind of marketing is much more visible and tangible for them than to say like we're attracting a more diverse crowd. Like maybe you are, but that's harder to see than Kotaku posts about like silly, stupid things. But then we get diversity as a result of that. But it is still tangential to the primary directive of we're doing this because we want everyone to see our game, and we don't really, it's not important necessarily what route we're taking to get there.
The short answer on that one is vote as much as you can with your wallet. And I know we love games and we want to play games and we want to have fun, but if this is an issue that's important to you, you have to let people know. All right, we have literally no time for the last question, but we're going to take it anyways because she's been super patient. So send us out. What do you got for us? Oh, that's a great one to end on. This is rough because I swear I played a game like that and I don't remember what it was. And it wasn't Sly Cooper 3, but we have a recommendation. And actually, this kind of leans to a point I was going to make with my other stuff, which is that because this stuff doesn't occur to me and I don't think of it, and you ask me, and that's not my experience, so it's never really registered back here, that kind of makes the point, right? Which is that, if I can't think of it because I'm a straight white male who hasn't had this experience, that's kind of bad, right? Like, it should be there. It should be visible. I should be able to give you 5 games that would do that for you, and I can't, even if they're out there, and that's bad, and I'm sorry.
God, there was an iPad game. I'm forgetting the name of it. It was about a soldier coming back from war who loses his vision. And as in battle, and it was about like the emotional impact of that, and it was very abstract, and it was very. I'll try and get the name of it. Does anyone else have any recommendations?
Yeah. If anybody. Sorry, what? Killer 7.
But it's sort of. I feel like it's not really about him being in a wheelchair. Like he could have been in a wheelchair or not in a wheelchair, and it wouldn't have really affected the game, and probably maybe that's debatable, but I think that was my read from it. Not to dismiss yours, because it's a good suggestion. I'm just like, okay, that's what is that representation really doing for the story? Yeah. I have not played. I haven't.
Okay.
Played Bloodborne.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay. Fantastic. There you go.
Yeah.
All right. Like I said, we're about 10 minutes over our allotted time. We could have done another hour here.
Thank
you
you
guys have been
so much.
so good.
Thank you.
You've been so good. We love you.